Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are just a few weeks from the first votes, actual votes being cast in the early nominating contest for the presidential election. And one of the main points of discussion, central focuses heading into this election, centers around the economic well-being of our country. That's because, generally speaking, how people feel about the economy writ large is largely predictive of how an incumbent president will perform if and when they run for re-election. And a lot of people have noticed that there is a strange paradox at the center of our economy, which is that if you look at many, if not most, of the empirical metrics, the economy is doing surprisingly well. If you look at economic sentiment, however, how people feel about the economy, the numbers are near historically pessimistic. There's a real gap between how the economy is actually doing, at least based on most of the measurements we normally use, and how people think the economy is doing. Or, I should say at the very least, how they tell pollsters they feel about it. You can see it here on this chart. You see how the blue line, how you'd expect people would feel about economic numbers, and the red line, how they actually feel, have usually been in sync, right? Like when things get worse, people feel worse. When they get better, people feel better. Right now, there's a huge gulf between them. That gulf, it is worth noting, does not exist in similar wealthy countries like France and Germany and the UK. It's only here, even though we're doing a lot better than those places. And because of this huge debate is broken out about how to explain this fundamental gap. Now, one argument is that people feel so badly about the economy because, well, they're still frustrated by the experience of the last few years, or that there are certain things like housing prices right now that are still very high. And it's true. Housing prices are high right now, and that's hard. Others argue that Americans are just getting inundated with negative messaging about the economy. Now, I gotta say, I'm definitely very invested in understanding this phenomenon, but it's worth actually taking a step back just to kind of look at the actual economic record of the incumbent president. What sort of circumstances has he inherited? What has he accomplished independent of the public perception? Let's look at how we got to where we are now. The theme of the Biden presidency has been inheriting a succession of essentially unprecedented crises that have afflicted the entire world and have produced way worse economic outcomes in other peer countries. I mean, the source of all this, of course, right, the original source is that we had, as you might remember, a once-in-a-century pandemic globally that killed millions of people, shut down most of the world economy, shut down entire industries, and then we tried to come back out of it. That's the basic thing to remember. Now, as president, you get credit for things when things are good. You get blamed when things are bad, even if they're out of your control in both directions. I mean, we saw this in 2019 when Donald Trump had done essentially nothing to help the American economy. In fact, tried his best to hurt it with those massive tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations and a ridiculous trade war. But he still presided over an economy that was finally recovering after a financial crisis a decade later, and he got the credit for it. We also saw it in 2020 to a certain extent when COVID annihilated the U.S. economy and the incumbent president, Donald Trump, lost. And once Joe Biden took over, basically from the very moment he was sworn in, we became inundated with negative messaging about the economy. Some of it, a lot of it, was rooted in real crises the administration had to tackle. A lot of it was overhyped. Now, this collective freakout about the economy happened across the media ecosystem, but it was most pronounced on Fox News. I think it's worth taking a look at what exactly Americans have been hearing about the economy over the past few years, and compare that with the actual circumstances and, crucially, how the Biden White House responded, right? They inherit the circumstance. How they respond is up to them. Let's start with the issue of labor, of workers. Biden took office amid an unprecedented global pandemic. Remember, there was not even a widely available vaccine when he was sworn in. As a result, the Biden administration continued the economic stimulus from the Trump pandemic response, right? They passed on a party line vote the American Rescue Plan. Huge amount of aid to families directly, included additional direct cash payments, an additional $300 a week in unemployment benefits. This was a big risk, let's remember. And Fox's response to labor shortages, which were real, amid a deadly global pandemic, was that suddenly no one wanted to work anymore.
Biden created a labor shortage because he gave workers way too much free money.
183,000 people dropped out of the labor force.
Biden created a labor shortage.
Labor shortage is
Labor shortage.
An 81-year-old woman pitches in during the nationwide labor shortage.
They just can't find people.
With the labor shortage, people are making more money to stay home. They're bringing out the robots.
Now, some businesses had trouble finding workers. It was a real challenge for the White House, especially when the Delta variant hit that summer, and more than 100,000 people were still being hospitalized every week. But then what happened? Well, the Biden administration continued its vaccination campaign. The virus subsided in its acuity to a level where people were comfortable going to work in person. Equally as important, the bold agenda of economic stimulus really worked. Unemployment rates dropped massively, from 6.3% when President Biden took over to 3.9% in the last jobs report. Again, you can see it right there on the chart. That's a chart that you want to go down, right? That's the unemployment rate. You want it to go down. And you don't need to be an economist to understand that the line did just that. People definitely do want to work. It's a hot job market. So, okay, Fox mostly moved off the nobody wants to work anymore narrative once the jobs numbers improved and it was clear people did not work. Then there was a new boogeyman in town, the supply chain. Now, again, to be clear, these issues were very, very real, again, especially in the aftermath of COVID, which disrupted just about everything. Fox took the opportunity, starting all the way back in October 2021, spinning the yarn that Biden was both responsible for the supply chain issues and apparently doing it to ruin Christmas for America's children.
The Christmas present you want? Probably stuck on a ship somewhere.
Economists are warning many Christmas presents for your kids, they're not going to be arriving in time.
The holidays have been harder this year for many Americans thanks to Joe Biden.
Can we call Joe Biden Scrooge or the Grinch yet?
The Grinch who stole Christmas.
The Grinch who stole Christmas and American greatness.
Democrats are going to be stealing our children's future. Just like the Grinch in the middle of the night, slithering around those presents.
You get that? You get the comparison to the Grinch, the famous Dr. Seuss character who ruins Christmas. But months before Fox started its latest war on Christmas, President Biden had already put together this task force to combat the supply chain issues. By the fall, he announced that the Port of Los Angeles would be working 24/7 to clear the backlog, as well as additional investments from UPS and FedEx to make sure packages got moving. By November, the heads of a bunch of major retail companies were shouting from the rooftops that there was no supply chain issue affecting holiday shopping. In fact, holiday spending in 2021 grew nearly 15% from the year before, shattering all kinds of records. Crisis averted, the presents were under the tree. And to be clear, it was not just Christmas presents. Early last year, Biden administration was also dealing with a very real and very scary shortage of baby formula. They put together another plan to increase supply and fix allocation issues, which were caused both by a shuttered factory and a product recall. The White House later declared that production had actually increased year over year under their watch. By October, shelf stock rates were back where they were before the crisis started. Okay, so by this point, Biden's been president for 2 years. The midterm elections were approaching. Republicans didn't have a ton to run on, especially after that Dobbs decision struck down abortion rights. Their best hope, the central hope, was to run on the economy and specifically inflation, which really had been spiking for a whole bunch of reasons, including around the world, and partly because of a hot labor market, as well as those lingering disruptions from the pandemic. And Fox News did its level best to act as the messaging arm of the Republican Party, spending day after day after day talking about eggs.
Egg prices for the month of December up 60%.
59.9% on eggs.
Eggs now are through the roof.
The price of eggs. Prices on eggs.
Egg prices.
Eggflation is real.
Eggs are so expensive.
The egg has become so expensive, no more Easter eggs.
Everybody I know is getting chickens so they can have their own eggs.
Now, eggflation is actually an interesting case in that it really wasn't about broader inflation at all. In early 2022, an avian flu outbreak killed tens of millions of egg-laying chickens. Yet another example of the supply crunch out of the president's control. Guess what? The ship corrected course. Farmers were able to raise new chickens. Egg prices came right back down. Your omelet is not in danger. But believe it or not, eggs were not the primary target of Fox's breathless inflation coverage. No. Fox saved the big guns for perhaps the most salient political issue of our time.
Let's talk about the pain at the pump. We're paying some of the highest gas prices per gallon in American history.
At another daily record high.
Gas prices, they're through the roof.
Gas prices are through the roof.
Gas prices are through the roof.
Gas prices are now through the roof.
Gas prices are through the roof.
Gas prices are through the roof.
Pain in the gas. Gas prices surging.
Republicans and their allies in the media were nothing if not on message. Again, the 2022 midterms were supposed to be about one issue, inflation, specifically at the pump, where you see the prices every day. And in theory, that should have been a pretty clear attack. After all, there was a major land war in Europe and a mass blockade of Russian oil, and oil prices really, really went up. At one point, gas was averaging more than $5 a gallon. Did Joe Biden cause that? No, he did not. Does it matter? Well, this single-minded campaign message was not particularly effective, especially when being delivered by some truly terrible candidates. And the big red wave did not materialize. So you got to think that many voters simply did not blame the Democrats for high gas prices, even after months of folks plastering stickers of President Biden labeled, "I did that" at gas pumps. Those stickers, by the way, might be sending quite the different message these days. I mean, for better or for, in my opinion, worse, domestic oil production is booming under President Biden. We're producing more oil than Saudi Arabia and Russia. And guess what? Gas prices are way down from their highest peak last year. The national average is hovering at about $3.22 a gallon, the lowest in nearly a year, following a steady decline. And that tracks with all kinds of prices. Inflation has cooled dramatically over the past year, with rates steadily declining from a peak of about 9% last year down to about 3.2%. So again, you don't really hear Fox News talking too much about the price of gas these days, or the price of eggs, or Christmas presents. And so the story of the Biden presidency so far has been almost like this series of metaphorical meteors hitting the earth, unexpected, in many cases unprecedented crises that the White House had to attend to. And each one has caused huge cycles of negative coverage, enormous around-the-clock panic across the media. And in basically every case, the Biden administration has attempted to do something about the problem. In many cases, they saw real, tangible success, which is to say, in most cases, they just quietly did their job. Then they moved on to the next crisis. But that is not the message getting through on Fox News. No, the message on Fox is that the entire economy is going to collapse any minute now.
First, let me say for the record, it's a recession. I'm telling you, it's a recession.
If it smells like a recession, it walks like a recession, it's a recession.
We begin tonight with the Biden recession.
The Biden recession.
The Biden recession.
The Biden recession. The auto industry is in recession. The housing industry is in recession. Retail is in recession. Advertising is in recession.
Recession, it's a certainty.
We have dismal consumer and business confidence because we're hearing recession, recession, recession.
Well, that's interesting because she's right at one level. The dismal confidence is probably because they're hearing recession, 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 except there is no imminent recession. According to a recent survey of business economists, the overwhelming majority of them, more than 75%, do not believe that a recession is likelier than not. In fact, the fundamentals of the economy are much sounder than you might think they are. GDP is absolutely booming. Even more importantly, this is central, real wages are rising. That means wages right now are rising faster than inflation, which means working people have more purchasing power. In fact, the largest wage gains have happened in the bottom 40% of workers, from the bottom up. The certain recession is now far from certain. It may even appear unlikely, which itself is a minor miracle. We are left in this weird environment where people do genuinely feel very bad about the economy. And I'm not telling anyone how to feel or what their finances are. People feel how they feel. If they're stressed, they're stressed. Housing prices are high. That's true. But as I said, the weird thing about presidents, the way that credit and blame work in the public consciousness, presidents get blamed for the bad stuff, praised for the good. Even when, say, the Fed had more to do with cooling inflation than the White House does. But I also think that from the perspective of economic management, dealing with what's dealt you, President Biden is just not getting the praise he deserves. If you are evaluating presidential performance, you got to keep the rules consistent. Donald Trump and his buddies on Fox want to praise him for the great economy from 2017 through 2019 while ignoring the 2020 disaster that unfolded under his watch. They want you to believe Trump's term only lasted 3 years and then he just disappeared before Biden took over and a bunch of bad stuff happened under his watch. The actual record is that Donald Trump oversaw the biggest job loss of a president in American history, along with mass death and abject disaster. Now, you might say that was not all Trump's fault, and fair enough, But inflation and the supply chain and eggs and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and spiking gas prices and shipping backlogs, those are not President Biden's fault either. But he has gotten to work putting together an economic vision completely opposite of Donald Trump, who cut taxes for corporations and rich people as his signature economic move. As President Biden likes to say, he wants an economy from the middle up, from the bottom up, and it's actually produced tangible benefits. More workers unionized, higher pay, and the best economic performance of any president under extremely difficult conditions this nation has seen since Franklin Delano Roosevelt.